Well, hello everybody, how are you guys doing? Welcome back to the channel, and today we're actually talking a little bit more about The Legend of Zelda again. However, we're not really focusing just on Tears of the Kingdom. We're actually going to revisit everyone's favorite fun story from the end of 2022, the possibility of Switch ports of Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. So we find ourselves in a pretty interesting situation when it comes to the rumors and discussions around these two games. Obviously, we're talking about The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess and the Wind Waker, which were both GameCube games, and of course, Twilight Princess, also a Wii game. It was actually a Wii release before it was a GameCube release. I think sometimes some folks forget that because it was so long ago and several generations ago. But even though Twilight Princess was a dual release and was initially designed and developed for the GameCube, it actually released on the launch date with the Wii, and several months later, the GameCube port came out. And as we all know, those games also got fantastic, just flat-out wonderful ports to the Wii U several years ago. They both were ported in HD, very beautifully, by the way. They just looked fantastic, especially the Wind Waker. And they also got really interesting and cool support for the gamepad for the Wii U. Really, in my personal opinion, I think that the overall gamepad support for the Wind Waker was better and more in-depth and thorough than it was for Twilight Princess, but overall, it was just great to have that real-time map and some gamepad support in any way for both of those games. Now, of course, in the Switch era, we've all been feeling like it makes a ton of sense to take those two games and also bring them over to the Nintendo Switch. Whether they're just making straight ports of the already HD ports that were brought to the Wii U, or if they do even more tweaking and more improving quality of life and graphics-wise, and in a different, better way, bring those games from their original platforms over to the Switch. In my opinion, I think we're losing some of the best parts of the experience by removing the gamepad from the equation, but it is what it is because the Switch is the Switch. It's not the Wii U. It doesn't have dual screen support. But it would still be a win, especially if they did other improvements, like I said. And this is even aided by the fact that eventually Skyward Sword, of all games, also made it to the Switch with a fantastic HD port itself. And it's worth noting that Skyward Sword was the game previously thought to be impossible to bring to any console other than the Wii because of the unique way it relied heavily on the motion controls. But of course, the Joy-Cons provided the perfect conduit to make that all work, and on top of that, Nintendo did a phenomenal job creating a version of more traditional Zelda controls that actually worked on the Switch. It's not the same as the way you would play like a Twilight Princess or a Wind Waker with traditional controls, but it worked really well, and I just think it was a fantastic port. Obviously, we can debate the price, the fact that they charged a full $60 for the game. Some people feel that was fair, some people feel that that was unfair. I personally didn't really mind, simply because I love the game, and I think that the HD port on the Switch was just incredible. And so that brings us now back to last year, where after all of these years of a lot of us wondering and waiting if we were going to see Wind Waker and Twilight Princess come to Switch, we had Jeff Grubb himself, who has really gotten his name in the news for a lot of things over the past couple of years, and he's mostly been right about a lot of stuff. Most recently, we're coming off of the release of Metroid Prime Remastered, which we know fits into a lot of what he was saying at the end of the year. And in 2022, along with a Metroid Prime remake and straight ports of Metroid Primes 2 and 3, he was also claiming that the ports of Wind Waker and Twilight Princess were also supposed to appear. And so this brings us to why we find ourselves in a weird situation, right? He made a lot of claims around specifically the Metroid Prime games and these two Zelda games, right? And this is not including the fact that he also got a lot of other things correct prior to this. Pikmin 3 Deluxe and the Super Mario 3D All-Stars, these were things that he himself predicted and were accurate. So then he talks about all these Metroid Prime games, and he talks about these two Zelda games, and none of them did happen in 2022, as we know, but right in the beginning of 2023, only a few weeks ago, that Metroid Prime remake, quote-unquote, turned out to be real in the form of Metroid Prime Remastered, which has taken the world by storm because it is so freaking excellent. And so what's really interesting and kind of fun about this whole thing is we get to now revisit the other claims he was making. Since we know he, and also Emily Rogers, was right about the Metroid Prime remake, we now get to wonder, okay, well, does that mean that everything else he was talking about was true, including Metroid Primes 2 and 3, and including the Wind Waker and Twilight Princess? And so now we find ourselves in 2023. We are only 2 months away from the release of the next big Zelda game, Tears of the Kingdom, Everyone is focused on this game. Everyone is okay. Not everyone is excited for it. I think we all know that there are some people concerned about the overall quality of the game. But I do truly think that the people concerned about Tears of the Kingdom are a pretty vocal minority. I think the vast, vast, vast majority of us, myself included, are really just hyped as hell for Tears of the Kingdom. That's how I feel. I know it's going to deliver. I know it's going to blow me away. I cannot freaking wait for it. But then we come back to this conversation that we've been having for years about Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. We come back to the fact that Jeff Grubb himself predicted them last year, and we then come back to the fact that one of his big predictions alongside of that, Metroid Prime, did come true. So are we also, in some crazy way, on the cusp of seeing the Wind Waker and or Twilight Princess also coming to the Switch? And while a lot of people might say no, because Tears of the Kingdom is right around the corner, I kind of feel the opposite, and I actually think that there is a great chance we are going to see one or both of these games come to the Switch soon. Now, I'm not making any claims or trying to start any rumors or leaks myself. I'm only basing my conversation and theories off of what we all know publicly about what Jeff has said, what has come true and what hasn't come true, and just what also kind of makes sense to me logically, right? And I think that the concept of one or both of these Zelda games coming to the Switch is predicated on whether or not you think Nintendo would release other Zelda ports in the same year as Tears of the Kingdom, or in any period after Tears of the Kingdom, right? Because I think a lot of folks want to say that if Tears of the Kingdom is coming out this year, then why would Nintendo release another Zelda port in the same year? And I personally don't think that Tears of the Kingdom has to have any sort of impact on whether or not Nintendo would release those games, but I do understand why other people would feel that way. So, like I said, it comes down to whether or not you think Tears of the Kingdom would even impact Nintendo's decision. Of course, it goes without saying that they could also release these games next year in 2024, even though we're on this whole kick about the next-gen console and if that's released or revealed this year or next year, and now there's just more and more signs every single day, literally every day. There is more signs pointing to the fact that this thing is going to be coming pretty soon here. I still think that, you know, we can't forget that even if this thing releases at the end of this year or if it's early next year, they will still be making and releasing Switch games, right? I've been singing the song to you guys about this for 3 years, that even when the next-gen console comes out, the Switch will still be supported for a while. There's always overlap. The Switch is way too popular and successful for Nintendo to just kill it the day the next thing comes out. And so, not only do I think that there's a chance that these Zelda games could still come this year in 2023, I also think that they could come out next year in 2024, even if the next-gen console itself has already released. Making ports and remasters and re-releasing some of their most famous games is something that Nintendo loves to do, and they've loved to do it for a long time. The simple fact that Wind Waker and Twilight Princess themselves were even ported to the Wii U shows us that. And so, when we look at how Nintendo likes to do things anyway, it just makes so much sense for them to release these games in some fashion. We know that they don't really have to put a whole lot of money and effort into these games to make them worth purchasing on the Switch. I mean, I think we'd all love for them to do more improvements on the visuals and the quality of life stuff, but at the end of the day, even if they played the simple route and just made straight ports of the HD games from the Wii U, and they just work around the lack of gamepad, that they're still going to be pretty good, and provided they don't overcharge for them, which, to be fair, we know Nintendo does like to overcharge sometimes, but if they price them appropriately and they just made straight ports, we're all going to buy them. We're all going to be happy with them. Nintendo's going to make a ton of money, and they don't have to put a lot of time and effort into it, right? It's the same thing I was saying about the Metroid Prime trilogy for years, even before Metroid Prime Remastered was confirmed. Even if they just made straight ports of those 3 games, they would have made a killing as well, and I think the same thing applies to these Zelda games. It's just money on the table for Nintendo, and it literally is the exact thing that they love to do. Now, when we revisit the idea of them releasing these games this year in 2023, the same year as Tears of the Kingdom, I personally think that if Nintendo was to choose to release those games like at the end of this year, in the October-November holiday time, that's why I think they would be willing to do it, because it would be several months after Tears of the Kingdom. I think that what we see is that on this side of Tears of the Kingdom, the time before it's released, it kind of clouds people's vision about what everything will look like once we're 5 months past the release of Tears of the Kingdom, right? It's not the same landscape once Tears of the Kingdom is even 4 or 5 months old. And at that time, Nintendo releasing 2 ports of 2 old Zelda games, it's not going to have any negative impact on Zelda. Right now, in this 2-month window before the release of Tears of the Kingdom, I think some folks feel like, oh, it's going to take too much away from Tears of the Kingdom to release Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. And I'm like, that just doesn't make sense to me. I mean, if we were talking about Nintendo releasing those games like next week, yes, I would totally agree with you. Nintendo would be like overloading us with Zelda, and Zelda would be cannibalizing itself in all sorts of different directions. But the theory that I'm laying out is that they would do it this holiday, like I said, 4 or 5 months after Tears of the Kingdom has released. And by that time, most of the world will have played the game, and most people will have beaten the game. And yes, that game is going to be talked about and replayed for years to come, but the initial hype and buzz around that game will be long since past. You guys, November 2023 will be a very different Zelda gaming landscape than right now in March of 2023, before Tears of the Kingdom has released. And so I'm not necessarily making a specific prediction that Twilight Princess and Wind Waker will release in holiday of this year. I'm just saying it's an option on the table because I don't think there's a cannibalization of Zelda games going on if Nintendo does it many, many, many months after Tears of the Kingdom has released. But more than likely, maybe they are games that make sense for 2024. And if I was to even make a prediction, which I'm not really trying to do in this video, but I guess I'm about to. So if I was going to make a prediction, they probably are ports that make more sense for 2024. And so to wrap this up, we come back to the fact that this whole conversation is happening simply because Jeff Grubb said he heard that these games were going to be happening. He believed in them. And now that Metroid Prime Remastered has turned out to be a real thing, so clearly some of the stuff he heard was true. We come back to his comments about these Zelda ports, and I'm like, yeah, man, I definitely think they could happen. It's not a lock. Maybe they're not going to release on the Switch, okay? Again, I'm not making a prediction that they will come. I'm just saying that I think there's a great chance that they will. What Jeff Grubb said makes sense to me. We know what Nintendo likes to do. He himself has been right about a lot of things. The Metroid thing just dropped. I mean, the stars are aligning for these Zelda ports to come to the Switch in some way, shape, or form. It's just too obvious. Skyward Sword has already come. Metroid Prime Remastered has already come. I just think there's too many signs to show us that it really could happen. So this is what I think, with any luck, everything Jeff Grubb had heard is true, and we're going to see these 2 games come to the Switch sometime in the future.